In a moment, Luke and I are going to have a conversation about some of the issues that have arisen from those conversations. But first, with the magic of technology, we're going to see a video from Angela Rayner, who, while she couldn't join us, did want to speak to us.
Thank you to Labour Coast&Country for inviting me to join you today. As your Deputy Leader, my first job, alongside Keir, is to build an election-winning machine that can deliver our goal of a Labour government in 2024. To do that, the road to a Labour majority and a Labour government must encompass our coastal communities, countryside communities and smaller towns and villages, not just the big cities and the traditional heartland areas. We all know that we have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust and regain support. But as a party, we need to do the hard yards, and to do this work starting in the lead up to the May 2021 elections. The government's one-size-fits-all approach to the furlough scheme will devastate coastal and countryside communities that rely on tourism and hospitality and will need a more flexible and ongoing support. I want to say that we will fight the Tories on any attempts to water down our food and environmental standards, which could do huge damage to UK farmers and rural communities by opening the door to low-quality imports. And we will fight for urgent and decisive action that we need to tackle the climate emergency and create the green good jobs that can help us reach net zero and transform many of our rural communities. We know that there are particular issues that are holding back our rural communities. In particular, poor transport links, substandard digital infrastructure, and huge inequality in education. But there are universal problems that people in rural places face just the same as those living in cities. Public services is at breaking point after a decade of austerity, a lack of access to secure, well-paid work, and sky-high housing costs. The issues holding people back are the same from Newcastle to Newquay. That's why our agenda for change has to speak to all of our communities and to deal with the issues that people are facing all over the country. Working together, the whole of the Labour family, reaching out to those that didn't vote for us, listening and offering hope for the future, is how we can win together and make that real change happen.
Thank you very much, Angela. So Luke and I are just going to spend the next 20 minutes just picking up on some of the issues that have arisen from the conversations that we've had. I think it's important to say that this is the start of a journey about Labour listening, hearing so that in due course Labour can be heard. Lots of fantastic ideas about how and what we should do and where and who with we might do them. But my first sort of observation, Luke, is the whole impact of the pandemic might have given many people a sort of pause for thought to think about who they are, where they live, the community that they're in. We've heard 2 or 3 stories about the nature of places changing as people spend more time locally. And for lots of the communities we're talking about here, locally really means an opportunity for Labour to be seen, heard and engaging. So, how can Labour make the most of all the leaders in this virtual room and many others who couldn't perhaps make today, and be present in their communities? What can we do to support that sort of new world, Labour everywhere type approach?
That's a great question, Hugh. Thank you for today. I've been blown away by just the range of expertise that we have right across the country. And for me, the challenge that we've got can be summarised by a very, very simple first step. We've got to turn up. We've got to turn up in our communities, which means not only turn up in terms of presence, campaigning in villages and towns, campaigning in our rural and coastal communities. We've got to be present in the media, we've got to be present in the letters page, and perhaps most importantly, we've got to turn up on the ballot paper, because there are far too many communities, both at parish, town, district, county levels, where people can go to the ballot, go to the polling station and not have a Labour candidate to vote for. So turning up has to be that first thing we do. Now, that sounds like a really simple first step. And for all the people that are on the call today, they're already turning up. But it means that as a party, we have to recognise that there is a political importance to turning up in rural coastal communities, that it matters. And it's been, quite an interesting few months to see how within our movement, the issues affecting rural and coastal communities has changed from we can't win there, oh, they're blue, they're never coming back to us, to a realization that, what do you mean most of the Red Wall seats are rural?
Yeah.
It's been this kind of eureka moment for lots of our colleagues, especially in big cities, who have started to realise that there is no path to power that doesn't see us winning Labour seats in rural and semi-rural communities, especially in coastal communities. Our target list from the last general election and from 2017 were mainly rural, semi-rural and coastal communities if you start breaking them down. And so what we have to do is turn up in our communities, but the policy area has to be visible in our national debate as well. And I think events like this is illustrating to me that is changing, and we have this moment of opportunity to really make the case for a much louder visible presence in those communities, but also of those issues in our national debate.
Okay, thank you. So that prompts a couple of thoughts for me. One is we've had pretty good attendance and participation from frontbench colleagues, and a few that wanted to make it but couldn't. So I think there's a scope for, and a couple of people are mentioned in the chat, having, in a sense, departmental sessions where we might get all the team in defence or all the communities and housing teams together and have a conversation like this. So we'll definitely try and work that up. There's a question for the Labour Party though. I remember doing a couple of constituency visits out in Norfolk, and this was a few years ago. A new member who was a nurse had joined, and there was lots of chat in the room about delivering the rose, and that was their leaflet and the banner title that we're all familiar with perhaps. And this woman had a fantastic question, and she just said, "Who's Rose?" And we all went, and we tried to explain what that was. But in the conversation, it then really reinforced this idea, because in that part of Norfolk and perhaps in other parts of the country, there wasn't anything, it wasn't just a question about what's the rose about, but it was, why is this called the Labour Rose when we are Norfolk Labour, or we are Cornish Labour, or we are whatever other identifier you want to pick. So what do you think the most important message for the party might be, in that sense of, if we want all of our leaders here and others to be present, how do we give them the support to do that?
Well, I think you're right to identify that in the past, the structure of our party and the materials and tools that were prepared didn't always work in many communities. Now, I'm very proud to be a West Country lad. I've got Smeaton's Tower behind me, proud to be a Janner from Plymouth. And all too frequently, I remember being a target seat candidate in 2015 and having to argue until I was blue in the face with people in headquarters why local issues mattered more than the national phrase they wanted to force down our throat. And I think what we've done over the last few years is able to diversify a message. Now, the online campaign tools that we all have access to, if you're in a leadership role within your local party, Contact Creator, the digital print services, increasingly the Facebook targeting tools, well, that doesn't just mean you need to access those if you're in a target seat, a historic target seat where you had an organizer that might do that for you. It means that we can use those tools to target communities and our messages in every part of the country. So you no longer need to have a RISO, be it a black and red one or a newfangled colour one, tucked away in someone's garage or in a dusty Labour Party office. You can go online, create the leaflets, have them delivered to you. That's high quality with a good production value, which means you can then target what messages you need in your community. Because I think the focus on command and control top-down messaging, yes, of course, we need to make sure that those key messages that Angela Key and the rest of the Shadow Cabinet are talking about are shared. But the most powerful way of sharing them is to put them in local context, to explain why it matters to this community here or this town here. And that is the ability that actually the internet flexibility has given us to be able to go and do that. But to do that, you need to train people as to how they get there. And that's why actually, the Labour Party's training team is brilliant, has been brilliant for quite some time. And I want us to give more credit and more opportunities and a greater expectation that for those leaders within our movement, be at national level, but especially at CLP level, that the idea of training, of upskilling, of becoming more confident to be able to use those digital tools in particular helps us win. And, CLP AGMs, may have been delayed because of the virus, but, I'm not sure about where you are, but, frequently, we're not looking at the skill sets and the training calibers of everyone when we're voting for folks. And we need to be starting to retrofit those skills on people in leadership roles to make sure that we can access more of the tools that we have at our disposal now.
Okay. One of the things I sometimes do, and I buy these in secondhand bookshops, is I try and make sure that the party at head office also appreciates the variety of not just England, but of Britain, because that might help with some of those stories that we need to engage in. One of the themes that came out perhaps of 2 or 3 of those sessions was the whole question, Steve Reed certainly touched on it, Judy touched on it, but the whole question of decentralisation versus centralisation. Clearly Tories in this present incarnation are centralising so they can take, use and perhaps abuse power in all sorts of contexts. There's going to be a devolution white paper any minute, we're told. So clearly there's an issue there for Labour to get to grips with local government in all its forms. We've long sort of spoken hard about how Labour needs to have a better relationship with town and parish councillors, for example. How do you think we can help? Because in a sense, it is in your brief because of the rural affairs elements, but it's also in Steve and other people's brief. How can we help Labour sort of properly understand the different nature of local government in some parts of these communities, the importance of town and parish councillors, not least to inform the party's response to that white paper when it does come out?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I noticed about being elected is that sometimes there is this sense that the hierarchy in our movement puts MPs at the top and councillors towards the bottom. You probably are all familiar with elements of that. Well, for the next 4 years, that needs to be reversed, at least because Labour isn't in power nationally, and we probably won't be until 2024. So we do need to support those places where Labour can be in power ahead of time. That means a much greater focus on local councils of all different flavours, a greater focus on Wales and our challenge in Scotland, and on elected mayors and the other forms of regional representation that we have. And that small but important shift that says local government is important and it will be more important for us as a movement is what you're hearing from Angela and from Keir and from Steve and others from the shadow cabinet, because we need to make sure that every part of our Labour movement is winning. And I think the white paper on reorganisation is a curious one, because we don't know what's inside it yet. We don't know what the level of population will be for the new authorities. We know that district councils will probably be wiped out as part of that, but still we don't understand where town and parish councils will be as part of that wider mix. But there is sometimes a sentiment that I hear colleagues talk about saying, well, if you add a rural area to this council here, we'll lose it forever. If you add a rural ward to the constituency and the parliamentary boundary changes, we're just done for. And I think we've got to start from a point that says there are communities where we haven't always been as strong as we would like to have been. There are also communities where we haven't turned up, and we need to be honest about that in terms of the national message, the resources, the campaign activity, the listening that we've got to do. And we need to recognise that we are, through demographic change and importantly through the change that the virus is producing, we'll be looking at very, very different communities by 2024 and leading up to it than we've had in elections in the past. And one of the things that, especially as a Southwest MP, I'm seeing is people saying, why do I need to travel every day to go to London or Bristol when I live in the West Country, when now I can work from home?
Yeah.
Why do I need to live in a big city when I can live in coastal and community in rural areas, have a better quality of life, have greater access to nature and the countryside? Why do I have to do that? And there will be, I think, as one of the effects of the virus, a population shift, a population change that will be a challenge for big cities. But what it also might do is change the demographics of some of those communities that some within our movement have sought to rule out as saying they're never going to come to us. And I think what we've heard today, especially from those brilliant leaders in local government that we've heard is, do you know what? We've got Labour reps in nearly every part of the country. They might not always have MP to their name, but we've got them. We need to value them, support them, help them grow, defend them, give them resources to do that, and importantly, talk them up. Because if we give this impression that we'll never win in these areas, then what message are we sending to the voters in that situation? We're sending a message that says there's no point voting for us because we don't really care about you. We're not really going to win there, so just jog on. We can't do that. And
Yes.
that is, I think, an increasing change that is changing.
Yes. And one of the things that we've been working on, both with parliamentary, local leader and other sort of supporters, I mean, things like this, which we produced a couple of years ago, I mean, and part of that observation was the Labour sort of position has to be about strengthening the local engagement, town and parish councils. If you're going to end up with a unified system of any sort, then it should be based on districts coming together, not sort of something so distant that it might as well be Westminster. That sort of leads us on. Go on.
You presented in the manifesto you presented there, and the work that you've been doing, you've made the case very strongly that it's not just about the coordination, the structures of local government. It's about the resourcing that goes along with it as well. Because the white paper that we're going to see in the autumn, potentially later this month, won't be about properly funding local government in its new form. In many cases, it's still about devolution of responsibilities, but not devolution of funding. It's about dilution of political makeups to have more Tories controlling more stuff. And so we've got to make the case along with that to say, well, actually, if you want to deliver local services in a rural, semi-rural or urban setting, you've got to fund it properly. And there is this moment that a few of your speakers today have spoken about this Venn diagram of angry Tories coming together going, what you mean you're going to build all over the Greenbelt and take say away in terms of planning? People that have historically not voted Labour looking at the party going, well, do you know what? I quite like Keir. I quite like what he's doing. I quite like that change. And people, especially in rural areas, who may have historically voted Lib Dem.
Yep.
Frankly, the Lib Dems don't exist anymore of the areas where they used to. We need to be aware of any resurgence, which I don't really see coming under Ed Davey, but nonetheless, we need to be aware of that, who may be open to voting Labour, because right across our communities, Labour used to be in third place in lots of rural seats in the southwest, as an example. We're now in second place in those seats. And while we need to build capacity all year round, we also need this deal between our seats. It's a proper paired seat relationship that isn't just a relationship that says, you see that marginal over there, that's the only one you've got to care about. It's one that says, we'll build collectively capacity all year round to make sure when it's needed the most, we'll be supporting the places we have to win to get a Labour government, Labour councils, Labour mayors elected. And I think that is a different relationship between urban and rural seats that we've seen before, especially if you've been involved in CLP campaigning. I don't think it's always been a healthy relationship between target seats who have, been given paired seats by regions. And, that top-down, requirement of you must go there to win, well, that doesn't work. But as we've seen from, digital momentums, where's my nearest marginal, as an example, when there is a sense of common bond, when there is a common objective, you can see more volunteers in the right location. You've got to especially help rural and semi-rural seats see a validity in building a campaigning capacity all year round if we are to need them when we do on polling day. Yes.
So there's something in there for me about relationship building that is a sort of party relationship building. We know through our work, there are some constituencies in what you might call urban areas like central London that have good relationships with constituencies, say in Kent or Sussex. And we could do more to build that on a person-to-person basis, because that's actually where you go and do work. You do favours for your friends rather than necessarily being told. So we could certainly do more work to support that. I wanted to touch on a couple of the sort of practical issues that people have raised about, the situation of rural communities and coastal communities. So at some point in your answer, you can pick up the fishery question, because you've been set up for it 3 times now. But I think one of the things that's really important to understand for all of our policy and sort of messaging and engagement is lots of the issues might be the same, but some of the people and some of the situations that people are in will be a bit different. There are certainly many more, or proportionately more, self-employed, many more small businesses, and SMEs that are sort of part of local economy, and quite a lot of people who do more than one job. Now, there are people like that in urban areas, so it's not a zero-sum game. But being able to talk about those things, especially as a movement that's sort of proud of its trade union heritage, many of those people will not have a trade union to support them. So that's one route into a conversation that isn't there. So how do you feel about our way of talking about the non-urban, the coastal, the rural, the countryside economies? What else do you think we can do? How can we help the Treasury team put some more of that language in? Although it's great to see the piece of work they did a couple of weeks ago about the furlough scheme. They clearly are open-minded to these issues. So economy with a beneficiary, what do you think?
Well, in my mind, you start with a starting point, which is a requirement for us to win the election. That is an understanding and an objective that Labour will be the party of the countryside. When you don't start with that big idea, then all we're doing is excusing a poorer deal for those communities in our campaign work. And it was mentioned earlier a few times about rural proofing. See, I'm not a fan of rural proofing as a concept. And it's a bit of a controversial one because it suggests that we make our policies for urban areas first, and then we check against the rural areas as a secondary point. And that creates a relationship which I don't think is the right one that I want to see. So I want rural proofing not to be a secondary task. I think it wants to be that primary, that first moment where we look at where we want to be. And if that starts from the objective of we will be the party of the countryside, I'm not looking for a 4-year debate, which no doubt we will have lots of articles written about whether we should be, could we, how do we be?
No, we must be. Yeah. So we're going to do urban proofing as a way of turning that on its head. Our policies will be designed to work in coast and country communities, and then we'll urban proof them. I like the sound of what that could do.
Yeah, because it changes where your starting point from your policy is.
Yes.
And especially important. So, the team that, I'm very proud to lead in this shadow cabinet, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs team, there has never been a time where the DEFRA brief is more important, because the basics of what that brief stands for are all under challenge. The air we breathe, the clean air, the food we eat, the standards, the availability of it, the water we drink and the plastics that's inside it, let alone those communities that have been hardest hit by austerity, the rural and coastal communities. There is that moment now where we have to make that more than just a siloed brief. And when you spoke about departmental briefs earlier and departmental discussions, what I love about this conference is that I've heard Thangham and Steve and Wes and Kate and so many of my colleagues talk about rural issues, not from there's some DEFRA stuff over there. It's very important. But, it's worth, I'm sure Luke will talk about it later. They've talked about it as an integral part of their brief. And that, again, is only a very subtle shift in the starting points of our front bench, but that's been made. And I think the challenge now is to make sure that is delivered across the board. And when you're talking about the food and farming and fisheries legislative policy areas that we have in front of us at the moment in Parliament, the agriculture bill and the words that Minette and Daniel spoke earlier is absolutely right. We must not let the Conservatives dilute and undercut our food and farming standards. We can't let them undercut our British farmers who will, with cheaply produced food, to lower animal welfare and environmental standards abroad. The Tories aren't standing up for them here. And interestingly, I think, I have a lot of time for Minette, but I think the way that the NFU have managed to be able to be boxed into the corner in defence of an agricultural trade commission, which few will be able to recognise, few will be able to name anyone about it, and few will be able to understand the importance of, I think it's really important that we take that debate, not let government ministers silo it into a technical process and say, we're starting from a point that our food standards, whether food's grown here or imported here, should be of the high, reasonable standards that have an equivalence because we all grow food in a slightly different way right across the world, but there should be an equivalence across those to make sure we're preserving those standards. And I realise I haven't mentioned about fisheries, so if you just forgive me from
Go on.
I bloody love talking about fish, and so you'll have to excuse me on this one here. I don't that fisheries as a policy area is owned by UKIP, the Brexit Party of the Tories. Labour's fishing policy is materially better for coastal communities than all their policies together. So our policy of landing more fish, requiring 2/3 of fish caught under a UK quota to be landed in British ports, creates overnight more jobs in those coastal communities, because for every one job at sea, there's between 8 and 10 on land in terms of fish market, processing, distribution, and more. In terms of redistributing quota, we've got ourselves in this odd situation after years and years of kind of like right-wing dogma around fisheries, that quota, instead of being a permission to catch fish, as it is for large parts of our European friends, is a property right. And with any property right, it gets aggregated and bought up by those people with the greatest wealth. So half of our quota is owned by families that are on the Sunday Times rich list. Well done them. They've done a good job there. But where's the benefit for our smaller communities? And I want to see a small share of that quota redistributed from the big super trawlers, the big industrial fishes, to our smaller boats. Our smaller boats, the under the 10-metre fleet. And if you think of a fishing boat, it's generally speaking a little boat, isn't it, that you're thinking about now? It's the ones that you see in paintings of Cornish fishing villages or Grimsby in the past. It's them there we're talking about. I want them to get more quota. They currently have 6%, just 6% of quota, of UK quota, but they employ 2/3 of people. So within those just two policies, our Jobs in Coastal Communities amendment to land more fish and the challenge of redistributing quota, Labour's policy would create a jobs boom in our coastal communities. And I think the challenge of the Brexit debate that I think John hinted at in his questions there is, how do you deliver something that people who voted for Brexit recognise as a benefit? Now, we can all have a view as to whether how benefits will be accrued, if they will be accrued at all. But when you talk about fishing, the benefit that people are looking for in places like Plymouth, Newlyn, Brixham, right across the West Country, all the way up to Grimsby, is more boats in the harbour, more fish being landed. That's what they're looking for. That's what the government is, to tell that story to those communities, to win back trust, to make sure we're doing it proudly waving the flag, because we need to make sure that we are articulating a proud, patriotic story about these industries, just as much as we are about saying the only future for fishing is a sustainable future where we don't fish beyond what the oceans can handle, to make sure we're not overfishing, that we're supporting these amazingly brilliant ecosystems, and we're buying more fish that we catch in our waters, not just fish we import.
So that's a really good exposition of Labour's position. So thank you, A, for giving it, but B, having put the thinking into creating it. You know, that understanding of, you know, it's not just about the high level story of fish and whose fish is it, but actually understanding how it's got to be where it is so that we can do something about making it more equitable and appropriate to all of those communities that once benefited from it. There's always a challenge in communicating some of these things. So I guess just thinking, it's sort of my last question, and then I'll let you have a quick final observation if you wish, and then I've got a couple of thank yous to give to everybody. But, you know, thinking forward to May 21, it's the first big electoral channels that we have, where people will appreciate. There's Scottish and Welsh elections, there's county elections as well as mayoral. So effectively everybody's going to get an opportunity to vote. What's your sort of most important thing that we as leaders in our communities and trying to get that Coast&Country voice heard, what do you think is the most important thing we need to try and do?
We've got to make sure we've got candidates on the ballot paper. It's a bit process heavy, but there are still empty wards that won't have Labour candidates in the county elections in particular. We need to make sure that we value these elections. It will be hard for us to use our natural advantage in these elections, which is our membership base, our brilliant, wide, broad party, numerical superiority, because we knock on more doors than the Tories do. Well, in an era of the virus, that's going to be more challenging. And so we do need to make sure that we're turning up in terms of our local media, in terms of the campaigns we're running, the work that Jesse spoke about earlier in terms of collecting that data. That means we can use it in different ways. That does mean we need to upskill, we need to retrain, and sometimes we need to rethink some of our campaign models that we're using in these areas. But we also need to know where we can win. Because you're dead right, Hywel, the next elections in 2021 will be a barometer for whether Labour can win again, whether Keir is going to be Prime Minister, and whether Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings are doing a good job or not. So we have to win. And that does mean all of us building capacity, but making sure we are, in particular, working in the lead up to it in places where we can win, where we have to win, to tell that story. Because the journey between now and 2024 isn't just one that says there's some stuff we've got to do and then there's an election. It's one pivoted by a number of elections, nearly every single year, that we need to tell that story of Labour winning back trust. And we do that by listening. Well, first, step one, turn up. Step two, listen. And then step three, campaign. And that's what we have to do. And one thing that conferences like this and the people that are on it have this amazing opportunity to do is to keep that visibility within our party. Now, one thing I want to do as the person looking after the Shadow DEFRA team is make sure that we're preparing materials that is easier for local parties to be able to use. We've got the Environment Bill, the Agriculture Bill, and the Fisheries Bill all at the same time. There's not a lot of huge amount of capacity within my team to do as much on the campaign stuff until those bills are out of the way as I'd like. But that's the challenge that I have to chase, because there's no point me working my socks off with Daniel and Steph Peacock of South Fisheries in great bill committees making wonderful speeches if no bugger listens to them, right? We need to make sure that we are getting those messages out. So next week, when we've got the Fisheries Bill Committee, look out for those shareable social contents that we'll be putting out there. Look out for when the Tories vote out the clause in the Fisheries Bill that says sustainability is the primary driver of fisheries management. When they vote that out, we're giving a license to potentially overfishing coming back. Let's make sure we tell that story. Let's do so by saying we've listened to what people say and we were acting upon it. Let's do so respectful of the fact that on fisheries, it's an identity issue just as much as it is about fishing. That we do so proudly supporting our fleet and the jobs, but being laser focused on the fact that more people are losing their jobs every single day. And Labour's message has to be about protecting the jobs we've got and creating the jobs of the future. Now, those green jobs aren't just about solar arrays and wind farms offshore. They need to be about sustainable fishing as well. And that's what we have to do. But one of the things that I want us all to do is to feel empowered to take those national messages and localize them for the communities. Cornelius is right. I want to see him and others in the letters page of his local paper talking about how the Tories will undercut our farmers. Who is speaking up for our farmers? The Tories have taken those rural communities for granted. Labour hasn't always turned up, but we are now. That is the message we have to get out there. And that focus on turning up and doing stuff means that the team that I lead in Westminster, the parliamentarians that we have, the candidates standing for election, all need to make sure their messages are suitable for rural and coastal communities. We're taking people with us, and we're doing so in a way that people can look at those messages and go, they might have a point there, and allow us to look again. Because the wonderful thing I think sometimes about how Labour talks about winning voters over, it's based on the campaign model where you knock on a door and you say, "Oh, hello, who are you voting next election?" And they go, "Oh, I'm voting Labour." "Who did you vote for last time?" "I voted Tory." And you put them down as an LT and you feel very happy on the canvas sheet. Well, that's not the way that conversions take place in the real world. We need to take voters on a process that says we have a validity of argument. We have, we're going to listen to your concerns and we're going to put those in place, and we're going to keep engaging with you, and we're going to win back that support. And that starts from the top. And that's why the objective that Labour will be the party of the countryside is so important, because if we don't have that starting point, then all the things that follow from that means that it's a secondary consideration. And in my mind, I'm guided by this big visual image, and if you've ever been to Plymouth Labour, you will have seen this in our office in Plymouth. We have a big poster on the wall that says, "Plymouth Labour, our job is to win."
Right.
Now, our job is not to come second.
Well, no, it isn't.
Give it a good go. It's to win. And
Yes.
that is Labour's job in the elections in next year and in 2024 in the general election. Our job is to win because communities are, communities
for us.
And that has to be the starting point for me. And what I want to do is work with all those folks that we've had a part of your conference, both speaking and listening in, to be able to do that. My team, myself, Daniel Zeichner, the Farming Minister, Stephanie Peacock, who looks after flooding and fishing, and Ruth Jones, who looks after air quality. I want to see every single one of us in communities, on Zooms, campaigning, supporting your efforts to go and do it. So if you've got that issue locally, let us know so we can support.
Yes. So,
when Joy's talking about crime in Durham, give us a quote so, opportunities that we can back you and go and do that. And that, for me, the call to arms I want us to be. I want Labour to be the party of the countryside, and I want to help us all achieve that.
Thank you very much, Luke. So part of being the party of the countryside and winning, as you rightly described, is about all the people in this room. So I'd like to thank everybody who's been taking part today, all the panelists, but equally all of you local members who've already stood up for what you think Labour's role in the countryside or on the coast might be, which is to be seen, to hear, be heard, to represent, and to help us win, because the country deserves a better government than it's got. So all of those things are important. Coast&Country will play its part. I think there's 4 or 5 things that have come out of this conference where we can help organise, bring people together to make things happen. Tom will put some of that in the chat. So please look to see how you can support, join, contribute to what we're going to do. As I say, we've had a fantastic morning. We've had a great participation from Shadow, front bench, from councillors, from members across the whole of the country. I hope you'll have a chance to just think through how you can now take an extra step or make an extra contribution, not just to Labour Coast&Country, although that would be welcome. It will help us build our capacity to support some of these things and make those connections. We will do a little report of today. We'll make sure every panelist and all the participants get it, but we'll also make sure we play it back into the front bench and the leader's office, because clearly it's a moment of opportunity. And if we do nothing else, let's make sure every county council seat in 21 has got a Labour candidate, as Luke's highlighted, because that's the thing that will start to make everybody appreciate that Labour is everywhere. Labour is listening and deserves to be heard, because it will give the country a better government. So on that note, I wish you a safe and pleasant journey home, or to the kitchen, or to the garden, or wherever it may be. We will definitely be doing other things. We'll have our regular Sunday lunch gathering at conference at 1 o'clock on the Sunday of conference on the 20th. We've got various chairs of these events or these sessions who will be speaking in the east of England at Labour's housing conference and things like that. And we are looking to work with the leader's office to have a session on campaigning for May that will be broader and engage all of those communities that we're trying to represent. So thank you all. We will be in touch. Please join, contribute, and have a good weekend.